I most certainly would. Today's been a unique day. Chief reminded us that the average temperature across the continental U.S. this morning was 11 degrees on average. And tonight, from balmy Florida, the manager at Evergreen Solutions, Nancy Berkley, is with us tonight. She's going to present the classification and compensation study overview to you all. There's lots more information, but this is a good overview to start. And if Evergreen reminds you of anything as far as, have you heard that name before? Evergreen has been a very good provider in the Highlands over the last 8 to 10 years of various studies. And in this case, they competed in a very competitive process and was the city's selection. So without further ado, Tallahassee, Florida, Nancy Berkley, manager at Evergreen Solutions. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, thank you.
Floor is yours.
Okay.
And you've got your clicker.
I do have the clicker. Okay. Good evening. Again, I'm Nancy Berkley with Evergreen Solutions out of Tallahassee, Florida. And yes, for those of you who might be wondering, in Tallahassee, when I just checked before, they actually closed our public schools in Leon County Public Schools right there in Tallahassee for tomorrow. So obviously we are expecting something there. I'm shocked, but at any rate, it's probably something. In the northern part of Florida, it actually does get cold. At any rate, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for allowing me to take the time to present the results of our study that we did for the city. We did do this study for the city. Concurrently, we did a study for the county as well to, have some efficiencies, if you will, when conducting the salary survey that we did. But we did do the studies, if you will, independently still based on your needs and so forth. And I'm open to taking questions throughout the course of this, however you want to do that. I'm fine with that. So very briefly, our agenda for this evening, I'm just going to talk high level about the study process, so you just kind of understand, hopefully at a high level, the methodology, or remind you of our methodology. Give you a little bit of information about what we've heard, what I heard when I was here conducting what we call employee outreach. Review of current conditions, that was looking at your current pay plan and where salaries are currently. A few words on compensation philosophy, which guides yourself, certainly the city's way you pay people and want to be competitive in the market, et cetera, and certainly what we were recommending once we found, collected the data. We'll talk a few minutes about what we found in the classification review part of the study. The compensation review, certainly the key part of it, the market analysis, conducting a salary survey. And then show you our proposed recommended new pay plan and talk about some possible implementation options and additional recommendations. So from a study process standpoint, we had an introduction, kicked off the study, and then I came here and conducted what we call employee outreach, which was discussing with the employees their participation in the study, completing something we call a job assessment tool, so they could tell us individually what work they were doing. So when we conducted the salary survey, and we're also looking at the classification review, we would understand that, not just looking at a job title. We would understand actually, it's effectively like them completing their own job description. It was an online tool, and we had paper copies available as well. But while I was here conducting employee outreach, briefed them about that JAT process and conducted what we call some focus group sessions. So got a little bit of data, which I'm going to share with you, about what people, the employees and leaders may have wanted to see changed about classification and compensation. I worked with the other consultants and myself worked with the city team to understand your compensation philosophy. I'll review that with you. We looked at internal equity by reviewing the results of those job assessment tools, what the employees completed, and developed a proposed class structure. Within that review of that, what we call internal equity, and without getting too far into the detail of that, there are compensable factors, things that make up what the jobs are worth, decision-making, working conditions, what have you. So we actually developed what we call a JET score, compensable factor score, that too. So there's that data piece of that internal equity came from that review. We then analyzed the external equity or market competitiveness of your current system. So we conducted a salary survey. I'll show you the results of that, and then we compared that to the market position that you want to be at for the external equity. Taking both of those, into consideration, we developed a new competitive pay structure, and then we developed what we call implementation options for taking current employee salaries and placing them in that new structure. And these, again, they actually could still be modified some if you wanted us to go back and look at some other options as well, but we did develop some recommendations there and estimated the annualized salary costs for implementing those options. What we have remaining is to provide you a complete draft report of all chapters. We've provided some of the draft chapters already. And then revise, update the job descriptions with the content that we gathered from the JET employees completing the JETs. So, conducting employee outreach, those focus group session interviews with some the senior leaders. Overall, employees enjoy working for the city and contributing to the community in which they live. They did express appreciation for some opportunities for advancement. Many of the employees mentioned, we asked some questions about performance evaluation. I should probably explain that. Not that it was a part of the focus of the study, but we did ask a few questions. So out of that, asking those questions, employees did express that they would like to have a formal evaluation process. Some shared that job titles didn't always reflect the current roles and responsibilities. And this is primarily, basically, when we conduct many of these types of studies. This is pretty standard of what we see when we conduct these studies, so nothing alarming here, at least from our vantage point. When we looked at the current system, meaning the pay structure, the design of the pay structure and the pay structure and where salaries are, what we found, which is, I'm sure you're aware, is you have what's called a step-based pay plan. Design of it is a step-based plan with pay range spreads of about 84%. And that's okay. 84% is actually a little wide. This is from the minimum to the maximum from a best practice standard. Best practice is about 50 to 70%. So 84 is a little bit outside of that. It's not bad or anything like that. It just
and that's taking all employee salaries into consideration?
This is taking just the range. This is just the structure, regardless of where the salaries are.
It goes from step one all the way up to city manager?
26. Well, I'm talking about the range, each range, the minimum range. So you have a minimum and a maximum for city manager position. You have a minimum and maximum for every single position.
Oh, okay.
So I'm talking about that.
Okay.
84%, that width of minimum to maximum. Again, nothing, I'll get into a little bit more when we designed and when we found what the peers had. We changed that a little bit to get them a little bit more in line with what the peers are. And did some other changes as well, but at any rate, again, just a data point really. Not all, again, the next two data points really, not all classifications were assigned to pay grade or range. Not all pay ranges were utilized. Again, data point, that's not a bad thing or anything like that, just a data point. Next, here, analyze the distribution of employee salaries across the current pay ranges. So overall, when we looked at all of the salaries across those ranges, and from the minimum to the maximum, you had 78% roughly in that first quartile, close to the minimum still. The midpoint, I'll get into that in the slide coming up, but I want to mention this now, is typically considered of a pay range. Again, yours are a little wider, okay, so that changes things a little bit when you're comparing to a more narrow range or what have you. But midpoint is typically considered market, where employees would typically expect or hope to have their salaries if they're performing proficiently and satisfactorily that work. I'll repeat that when we get to another slide, okay? So it's a data point that the salaries, are kind of what I would call clustered, in that first quartile, and definitely below the midpoint. Again, across all the studies we do quite a few of them, it's not atypical of what I've seen across different places. In fact, I'm surprised when they've got a very good distribution across the whole salary range because of things of economic downturn and so forth, and particularly in different areas, you may see this more, whatever. So I'm not, extremely alarmed. You're not, outside the box from others that we do these studies for, if you will. But it is a data point where I'm going, maybe those salaries, could get some movement if you can, fiscally more towards that midpoint. We'll talk about that more. So looking at compensation philosophy, there's some key elements of what makes up, if you will, a compensation philosophy. One is, what's the desired market position? Well, having the discussions with the city, with you, that you'd like to be competitive, that you'd like your salary ranges at least to be competitive. And that's, again, pretty common. Pay practices that you have and would like them to be, of course, always be equitable and flexible, have maybe a little bit of continue or maybe even more, add some more flexibility to pay practices. What do I mean by that? Maybe not as much in this area, typically regionally, but you may be competing, definitely in a private sector, you would be competing potentially with pay practices where you're not just competing with their ranges, if you will, potentially, but where they might hire people in and how fast or not they progress those salaries. So when you're competing in the market for that labor, it's not just the range, it's all of these things. It's the pay practices, pay increase methods, what have you, that come into play. And sometimes you do know what you're competing with and sometimes you don't. So a common thing bringing this up is I may hear, this could be any client, well, so-and-so, brought them in at $5,000 more. Is it because the range was $5,000 different, or because they were hiring in people at giving them credit for previous experience and hiring them in further into the range? All those things come into play and are factors. Again, definitely when you're competing potentially with a private sector, because private sector definitely uses more flexible, typically more flexible pay practices. Anyway, pay plan design that you would like to have now in what we call an open range structure. So the steps really are just, if you, I don't want to say just, but specific increments within a range. So with an open range, you could still do 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%. You could still, if you will, administer it in the same way, but you have flexibility, then you don't have to be exactly on that mark. If you can fiscally, give an award a 2.5%, a 3%, or whatever percent, introduce performance kinds of increases, whatever, you have that flexibility with an open range as opposed to have to being on those exact steps. So,
Nancy, under the traditional step system, it's typically, about 2.5% from one step to the other? So
probably.
But the gist of it is you've got all these boxes and you can only go from box to box. You can't go halfway and give a 0.5% raise or a 1.75%.
Yes. So in reality, it's like just, you can calculate the same thing, a 2.5, or the next year, a 2 or 3 or what have you. And what we find typically too, particularly with the step plans, again, during the time of the economic downturn, is many times we'll go to a client, they give us all the employee data, and it's like, well, the people, they have a step plan, but the employees aren't exactly on the step. Why is that? Because they had to kind of give up the step system when they couldn't afford to give, the full percent or whatever. So again, you could administer the exact same thing you do with a step plan, you just don't have it laid out as much. I'd say, again, this is a general statement across all the studies we do. More and more public sector are moving towards open range versus step systems. Step systems are still prevalent, definitely in different areas of the nation, and definitely more so in public safety. And then pay increase methods, your method now of giving pay increases are across the board. So which generally equate to as well the time in position or time with the city. Looking at classification structure, these are just some of the examples of some recommended class title changes that we have made or suggested. And some of them have to do, if you look at, for example, like Administrative Assistant 1, okay, it just needs to be an administrative assistant because there was no need for a 1 and a 2 or things like that. So some of them are pretty minimal, if you will. You didn't have, I wouldn't call any big, wow, you have to change so much, your class system is all, needs a lot of work. These are, some areas of, just shoring up some things or looking at things that we would say, might suggest now are more typically the class title that's being used, throughout the industry.